The silence in this house isn't empty. It's heavy. It's the kind of silence that screams at you, mocking every moment you chose to look away. They say the truth sets you free, but they never tell you that sometimes the truth arrives only after the fire has consumed everything you love. My name is Elias, and I used to believe that if you didn't acknowledge a shadow, it couldn't touch you. I was wrong. I ignored the signs until the floorboards were rotting beneath my feet, and by then, there was no way out. We bought this place in the late spring, a Victorian-era beast with sagging shoulders and a history that the realtor glossed over with a bright, predatory smile. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where Sarah and I would raise Mia away from the grinding gears of the city. But the house didn't want us. It tolerated us like a body tolerates a virus until it finally decided to purge. It started with the dampness. A small, dark bloom of mold in the corner of the guest room, shaped like a reaching hand. My wife, Sarah, noticed it first. She was always the observant one, the one who felt the shifts in the air before the storm hit. She pointed it out while she was folding laundry, her brow furrowed in that way that usually meant she was worried about the budget or the health of our family. She told me the air tasted metallic in that room, that her lungs felt tight every time she stepped inside. I told her it was just the old pipes, a symptom of a house built in a decade that didn't care about insulation or modern drainage. I laughed it off, kissed her forehead, and went back to my laptop, lost in the digital world where problems could be deleted with a keystroke. I chose to see a simple plumbing issue when I should have seen a necrotic wound in the structure of our lives. Then there was Marcus. Marcus was our neighbor, a man who had lived on this street for 40 years, surviving the gentrification and the changing tides of the neighborhood. He was a retired surveyor, someone who understood the literal ground we stood on, the way the tectonic plates of local history shifted. He stopped me by the mailbox one Tuesday morning, his hand shaking slightly as he clutched a stack of yellowed letters. He didn't look at me. He looked at the base of my house, where the stone foundation met the earth. He told me the birds had stopped nesting in the oak tree between our properties. He said the soil felt hollow when he walked to his porch, a vibration that hummed through the solace of his boots at night. He spoke of old maps, of underground streams that the city had tried to pave over but could never truly tame. I told him he was getting older, that nature is cyclical, and that he should probably check his blood pressure or perhaps find a hobby that didn't involve staring at my basement. I ignored the wisdom of a man who knew the earth better than I knew my own heart, dismissing his terror as the rambling of a lonely mind. By the time our daughter Mia started complaining about the whispering walls, I had already mastered the art of denial. It's a powerful drug, denial. It allows you to sleep while the world burns. She was 7, possessed by an imagination that could turn a coat rack into a monster and a shadow into a friend. She would sit in the hallway for hours, her ear pressed against the cold drywall, claiming she could hear people breathing on the other side. Not just breathing, she said they were counting down. I told her it was the wind in the vents, the house settling as the temperature dropped. I bought her a nightlight, a glowing plastic star that did nothing to illuminate the darkness growing in the corners of her room. I treated her fear as a phase, a childhood quirk to be managed with stories of brave nights and bedtime songs, rather than the primal instinct of a child sensing a predator moving within the very architecture of her home. The fourth person to enter this slow-motion wreck was Julian. Julian was a structural engineer I finally hired, not because I believed the signs, but because Sarah's anxiety had become a wall between us that I couldn't climb over. Julian was clinical, cold, and thorough. He didn't care about my excuses or my desire for a quick fix. He spent 3 hours in the crawl space, his flashlight cutting through cobwebs and secrets. When he finally emerged, he didn't look at me. He looked at the floorboards, his face a mask of professional concern. He told me the foundation wasn't just settling. It was being undermined by something he couldn't identify. He spoke of anomalous erosion and structural fatigue that defied the local geography. He showed me photos of the support beams, which looked as though they had been chewed by something with iron teeth. I felt a surge of defensive anger. I told him he was trying to upcharge me for a massive renovation we couldn't afford. I accused him of being a salesman disguised as an expert, a vulture circling a family's dream. I kicked him out of my house, slamming the door on the truth, clinging to my bank account while the very bones of my home were turning to dust and splinters. The final sign came from Father Thomas. I'm not a religious man, but Sarah insisted he come over for dinner. He wasn't there to exorcise ghosts. He was an old friend of her family, a man who had seen the best and worst of humanity in his small parish. But as soon as he stepped over the threshold, he stopped. He didn't look at the mold, or the warped walls, or the cracks spreading across the ceiling like frozen lightning. He looked at us. He looked at the way Sarah's hands trembled as she set the table. He looked at Mia's hollow eyes. He said the light in the house felt thinned out, as if the joy was being drained into a hidden reservoir we couldn't see. He didn't talk about demons. He talked about atmosphere. He begged me to take the family to a hotel for a week. Just 1 week, he said. Let the house breathe without you. I laughed at the expense. I told him I didn't believe in superstitions or bad vibes. I told him we were fine, that we were a strong family, and that a few cracks in the plaster couldn't break us. I toasted to our future while the floor beneath the dining table groaned in a language I refused to learn. The night it happened, the air in the house felt like static. It was thick, hard to swallow, smelling of ancient salt and wet fur. Sarah was asleep, her breathing shallow and jagged, her dreams clearly haunted by the same shadows that paced our halls. Mia was in her bed, clutching the stuffed bear I'd bought to silence her fears, her door cracked open just an inch. I was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, trying to ignore the way the liquid vibrated in the glass. That's when I saw it. The mold in the corner hadn't just grown. It had changed texture. It was no longer a stain. It was a substance. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb that matched the beat of my own heart, as if the house had finally grown its own pulse. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the wall. My finger didn't hit drywall. It sank into something soft, cold, and wet like the flesh of a fruit that had rotted from the inside out. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't in the walls anymore. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was a low, grinding sound of stone against stone, mixed with the frantic, high-pitched chirping of insects that shouldn't exist in this climate. I ran to Mia's room, but the door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked. The frame had warped so violently in a matter of seconds that the wood had fused into the jamb. I threw my shoulder against it, screaming her name, but my voice felt like it was being swallowed by the shadows, muffled as if I were underwater. I could hear her waking up, her small voice calling out for me, confused and terrified. "Daddy, the floor is moving. Daddy, help me." I ran back to the master bedroom to wake Sarah, but the hallway was no longer a straight line. The floor was pitching like the deck of a ship in a gale. Sarah was standing by the bed, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floorboards beneath her feet. They were curling upward like dried leaves. From the gaps between them, a black, viscous fluid began to seep, smelling of the deep earth and things that have never seen the sun. Suddenly, the sound of Marcus screaming erupted from outside. I scrambled to the window and pulled back the curtain. The streetlights were flickering in a rhythmic, dying cadence. I saw Marcus on his front porch, his arms waving frantically. Then, right before my eyes, his entire front yard, the tree, the mailbox, the stone walkway simply vanished. It didn't fall. It was deleted. A massive black maw opened in the earth, a sinkhole of such proportions that it looked like the mouth of a god. Julian's anomalous erosion wasn't a leak. We were sitting on top of a prehistoric cavern system that had been compromised by a century of urban neglect and diverted water. The Earth was reclaiming its space, and it was starting with us. I turned back to Sarah, but the gap between us had widened. The floor had split open, a jagged canyon of darkness separating the bedroom from the hallway. I reached for her, my fingers straining, but the house groaned a sound of dying metal and snapping timber that drowned out my own voice. The mold on the walls suddenly turned liquid, pouring down in thick ribbons like black blood, coating the photographs of our wedding, Mia's drawings, the life we had built. Everything was being erased by the very environment I had sworn was safe. "Get Mia!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. It was the last thing she ever said to me. The floor beneath her feet gave way with a sickening crack. She didn't even have time to scream as the darkness swallowed her. One moment she was there, a silhouette of the woman I loved, and the next, there was only the roar of falling debris and the whistling of air rushing into the void. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to think. I threw myself across the widening chasm toward Mia's room. The wood splintered under my hands, slicing into my palms, but I didn't feel the pain. I kicked the door with everything I had left. The wood finally snapped and I tumbled into her room. But Mia wasn't in her bed. She was huddled in the corner, her nightlight casting a weak, flickering blue glow on the wall behind her. The floor in her room was slanting toward the center, a funnel of destruction. I lunged for her, grabbing her small waist just as the bed slid into the darkness. I held her to my chest, her heart beating against mine like a trapped bird. I looked for a way out, but the hallway was gone. The only thing left was the window. I smashed the glass with my bare elbow, the cold night air rushing in like a phantom. I looked down. The ground was 20 feet away, but the ground wasn't ground anymore. It was a chaotic mess of shifted soil and broken pipes. I didn't have a choice. I climbed onto the sill, holding Mia so tight I feared I might bruise her. I looked back one last time into the house. In the flickering blue light of the nightlight, I saw the black mold covering everything, moving like a living tide, reclaiming the space where my life used to be. I jumped. The impact was a blur of pain and cold mud. I felt my ankle snap, a white-hot flash of agony that blinded me for a second. But I didn't let go of Mia. We tumbled down the slope of the crater, sliding toward the center where the darkness was deepest. I clawed at the loose dirt, my fingernails tearing, desperate to find purchase. My hand caught onto a piece of the old oak tree that had fallen in. I held on with every ounce of strength I possessed, anchoring us as the rest of our world slid past us into the abyss. I woke up in a hospital bed 2 days later. The air was sterile, smelling of bleach and cold plastic, a sharp contrast to the damp rot of the house. A nurse told me I was the only adult they had pulled out of the perimeter. Marcus was gone. Julian's warnings were found in his office, archived in a file that would now be used in a dozen lawsuits. Father Thomas had been the one to find us, having returned to the street because he couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He had seen me clinging to that root in the middle of the night, a broken man holding a terrified child. But Sarah. They never found Sarah. The sinkhole was too deep, the debris too unstable. They eventually filled it with tons of concrete, sealing the wound in the earth, but they sealed her in with it. I live in a small apartment now, on the 3rd floor of a concrete building where nothing grows and the walls are painted a sterile, lifeless white. I don't look at the corners of the rooms. I don't listen to the pipes. But Mia. Mia doesn't speak anymore. She sits by the window and watches the birds. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I see her press her ear against the wall, her face pale and frozen. I know what she's listening for. She's listening for the count to start again, because the signs are always there. They are written in the dust on the shelves, in the way the birds fall silent before a storm, and in the cold drafts that shouldn't exist in a sealed room. We just choose not to read them because the truth is too expensive to acknowledge. It requires us to admit that we are not in control, that the structures we build are just temporary veils over a hungry world. I ignored the signs until it was too late, and now I am the only sign left, a broken warning for anyone else who thinks they are safe behind four walls and a locked door. Look at your walls. Listen to your floor. And for God's sake, if someone tells you the earth is hollow, believe them before it decides to prove it to you by taking everything you ever loved.